So welcome. Thank you all so much for coming to this next session in our paper bag series 2022 for the Indigenous Peoples and Evaluation TIG from AEA. Today we have Dr. Awuor Ponge with us. We're very excited to have him, and we will let him take it from here.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Today, I want to talk about the EvalIndigenous African Voices project from Kenya. And this is a conversation with the indigenous Mijikenda of Kwale County. This was a project that was implemented at the height of Corona pandemic in towards the end of 2020. Right, and we conducted the study with my research assistant, Grace Wanjiru Murigo, who is not present with us today. Right. So, in terms of introducing EvalIndigenous, I can say that EvalIndigenous is a multi-stakeholder partnership that builds on the foundation of the knowledge and expertise of indigenous peoples around the world. And most importantly, it seeks to bring awareness to include and celebrate the cultural traditions and values, languages, and governance practices and ways of lives of the indigenous people wherever they are. And it also seeks to ensure that policies and evaluation practices for indigenous peoples are based on equity, fairness, and justice. It's also important to mention that EvalIndigenous is one of the networks that were established by Eval partners between the years 2015 and 2017. So the main objectives of the EvalIndigenous Network are various, but I just want to highlight some which are specific to this assignment or this project that we conducted. One of the objectives is to increase recognition, understanding, and implementation of responsive evaluation practices within indigenous contexts. It also seeks to build evaluation thinking and capacity among the indigenous peoples, evaluation practitioners, commissioners, as well as politicians. It also seeks to document evaluation and research protocols that have been developed or endorsed by indigenous peoples, as well as facilitate the indigenous people's self-determination, including that they are able to fully participate in evaluations in their respective communities. So about the specific project, this was part of the project by EvalIndigenous on the Voices project, and it sought to listen to the voices from the indigenous African, different indigenous African communities. Specifically, it sought to highlight the lived realities, especially the knowledge, practices, and challenges of indigenous peoples, including those thinking about as well as conducting evaluation, indigenous evaluation or evaluation in the indigenous context. And the project also documented some of the challenges that are faced by these indigenous communities, as well as suggesting how these challenges might be addressed for the good of the indigenous communities. So the indigenous community that we centered on in our project was the Mijikenda community in Kenya. And the Mijikenda community in Kenya live in the southern coastal region of Kenya. So it's important to mention that in Kenya, people who identify with the indigenous movement are normally or are mainly pastoralists and the hunter-gatherers, but we also have some indigenous communities who are fisher folks, as well as small farming communities. Also, it is important to mention that these small farming communities, some are in the forested areas with indigenous trees and the like. So it's also important to mention about the Kenyan Constitution, and the Kenyan Constitution, which was promulgated in 2010, contained a very progressive Bill of Rights. And this, among other things, made international law a key component of the laws of Kenya. And this, in a sense, guarantees the protection of minorities and the marginalized groups. So as I mentioned earlier, the Mijikenda are found in the coastal region of Kenya, and the Mijikenda come from the Swahili word Mijikenda, where Miji is loosely translated as a city or a homestead, and Kenda is 9. So Mijikenda is like 9 homesteads, right? And as I'll mention shortly, the 9 homesteads are derived from this Mijikenda community, or the 9 sub-tribes that comprise the Mijikenda community. And these sub-tribes are the Digo, Giriama, Rabai, Chonyi, Duruma, Jibana, Kambe, Kauma, and Ribe. I'll mention shortly how these sub-tribes came into being. So one important thing about the Mijikenda community is that they've long stayed in the forests, and they've protected the forests surrounding their ancestral homesteads. And these forests are what are known as the kayas, and these are many in the southeastern coast of Kenya. So the Mijikenda usually express their oral traditions through performing arts and other sacred rituals, especially that surround the sacred forests that are known as the kayas, where they are also able to get some valuable medicinal plants. And some of the traditional practices that are practiced by the Mijikenda include prayers, oath-taking, burial rites, and charms. Naming of the newborn baby is a serious ritual among the Mijikenda, as well as initiation into adulthood. When there are conflicts between the Mijikenda and other communities, reconciliation rituals are ritually carried out, and then marriage and coronations are also rituals that are highly respected among the Mijikenda community. So as you can see from those pictures, those are some of the sages that we did interview. You can see the one on the top left is one of the sages called Juma Mwaviko. Then in the middle, top middle, that's Sheikh Shaban Degwa. Then there's the next one, top right, is in the middle. The one we are interviewing in the middle is Binti Hamisi. She's called Binti Hamisi. Then down middle is another young sage. People normally associate sages with the old, but we were able to get one of these wise sages who is also a woman. She's called Sana Suleiman, something like that, a name like that. Then if you see the last picture on the left down there, that's when we were being welcomed to the Kaya, which is like the Kaya is a sacred forest, but inside the sacred forest, there's a special place for prayer. So this is where we were being welcomed by the sages. So what was the justification of this study? One, this is part of the EvalIndigenous Network aim, that is to increase the recognition and understanding of these indigenous contexts and practices, as well as facilitating indigenous people's self-determination. Two, the indigenous peoples are usually known for their rich cultures, the traditional knowledge systems, and their unique ways of life. So learning from this and sharing is also one way of passing this information from the sages to the youngsters in the community, or the youth. Then we also see that in the Kenyan context, there's a clear need for recognition of the rights of indigenous communities, especially over their ancestrally owned lands, because we find that in most of the regions, the indigenous communities do not have rights to their ancestral lands. But this is a unique case where the Mijikenda as an indigenous community are actually given permission by the government to own the ancestral lands, especially with regard to protecting the forest areas, which are the kayas. Then the United Nations also recognizes the need to respect and promote the inherent rights of indigenous peoples. Then lastly, this study sought to revitalize and sustain the endangered indigenous knowledge among the indigenous communities, especially those living in the kayas of the coastal region of Kenya. The indigenous knowledge has not been documented, clearly documented, although there's been some little documentation about the indigenous knowledge of these peoples. So the main method of this study was through the use of the indigenous navigator, and we adapted this at least to suit the specific context of our study. Specifically, the indigenous navigator indicators are structured around 13 thematic domains, but we picked some 3 domains which we thought were extremely relevant to our study context. And these ones were Article 1, which is on general enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Then the Article 3 on self-determination, and Article 34 on customary law. And then this study also it gave us an opportunity to use or to pilot the use of the Indigenous African Ethical Protocol for Evaluations that had also been developed by EvalIndigenous in 2021. Actually, it had been developed earlier, but it was approved for publication in 2021, just when this study had been conducted, I think, towards the end of 2020. So we interviewed 4 sages in the kayas, the 2 men I've just shown you and the 2 women, and we had to obtain the verbal consent of these respondents, and we also had to inform them outright that this was purely an academic exercise for purposes of learning and not for commercial gains. This was so because in the coastal region, they have seen so many visitors coming, tourists coming, and if they know that you're coming for tourism purposes, or maybe you're coming for non-academic purposes, then you have a lot to offer for them. But in our particular case, this was purely an academic exercise, and we did not have much to offer to the local community. Right, as you can see from that picture, you can see me second from left, and then my research assistant is on the far right, just on the front here. So that's when the sage on the far left was offering prayers to welcome us. Anytime visitors go to the kayas, the sages have to offer some prayers to welcome the visitors. And as you may also be able to see from some of the video clips that we shared on our YouTube link, there are also some rituals that have to be conducted to anybody who is entering the kaya, or the holy place, the holy forest, like to cleanse you before you are allowed to enter the holy grounds. So about the origins and recognition of the Mijikenda, there's a story that gives the origins of this Mijikenda, that they originated at a place called Shingwaya. And then as they were moving from that Shingwaya from the northern part of the country, coming downwards to the south where they presently stay, that is in Kwale and Kilifi, they were led by one old man called Mzee Muweye. And then there was a lady who was carrying a pot, and this pot had traditional medicine, which was to protect this indigenous community on their way as they were moving from their initial place of origin towards where they are presently located. And then when they reached a river called River Mache, this girl who was carrying the pot felt so exhausted and she fell down. And in the process, the pot she was carrying broke down into pieces, and it broke down into 9 different pieces. So as now they did not have anything to protect them on their way, Mzee Muweye could not continue with the journey. So what he decided to do was to pick each of the pieces and give to different persons, 9 different persons, to lead their own teams to different regions. And this is how the 9 different sub-tribes of the Mijikenda came into being. So there was a piece that was given to the Duruma, the Digo, Rabai, all the way to the Fungo. And interestingly, these sub-tribes came to stay into what are known as the Kayas for the respective names. So we have Kaya Duruma, Kaya Digo, Kaya Fungo, and all that. But again, as you will, I will mention later on, some unscrupulous persons have decided to do business with this Kaya thing. So they've created more than the 9 Kayas, which were blessed by this old Mzee, this old man. So one important thing that qualifies one as an indigenous person is that their parents and great-grandparents all belong to the Mijikenda. So this makes them qualify as indigenous. Then also the understanding of the culture and traditions of the community gives one a sense of entitlement as an indigenous Mijikenda. And another element that qualifies this Mijikenda as indigenous community is the traditional attire that is worn by the community leaders. This is also a manifestation of the indigeneity of the community. And as you will see in some pictures ahead, when you are entering these holy places, you have to wear some traditional attire, which is supposed to protect you from evil spirits and also to show that you are entering a holy ground. So you need to wear holy clothing, right? In terms of recognition by the government of Kenya as indigenous people, we find that the Mijikenda are actually recognized, and they have been given the authority to own their land as well as the forests, which are calling the Kayas, right? Then the recognition of the indigenous forest is manifest in the government erecting signboards about the need to protect the forests. You'll see in some of the pictures, they say, this is Kaya Kinondo Sacred Forest. Please protect this forest. This one is Kaya such and such a name, and this is a national heritage. And some of them are even recognized by UNESCO as natural heritage sites. So the government trains the local community on how to live in peace with the environment and take care of the environment as well as the forest. So one funny thing is that in as much as they're recognized by the government as an indigenous community, they do not have something like a certificate to show for it, that this is a certificate of recognition by the government. But through the practices or through the relationship between the government and the local community, there's an element of recognition of their existence as well as their rights. So They are free to exercise their traditional practices and customs without anyone questioning them. And interestingly, we find that the politicians also come to these holy places, the kayas, so that the sages or the religious leaders in the kayas can pray for them, especially around election time. Yes, so as you can see in the middle there up front, there's Kaya Mchwakara. This is the same as Kaya Duruma. It is for the Duruma sub-tribe. And you can see it is marked there as a national monument and World Heritage Site. So this is also a show of recognition of these Kayas, not only by the national government, but also UNESCO. As you can see far right top, that's when you are entering the holy place. You have to remove your shoes and then some cleansing rites have to be performed. And you leave your shoes there. And interestingly, no one can take your shoes when you leave them at the entrance to the holy place. Good. So about the Mijikenda Kayas, these are just the indigenous forests, which are the burial ground for the dead traditional religious leaders and medicine men of the community, like the ones who are praying for us. When they die, they are usually buried inside that forest, and they're believed to be the ancestors that protect the community from evil. Then religion and medicine always went hand in hand in this traditional community. And for one to qualify as a Kaya elder, one must have a good track record in the village as well as the society at large. One must also be able to make contributions to the community. One of the elders says, since I'm leading this Kaya, I'm also like a bishop. We have been responsible for leading prayers and the government recognizes us. The main reason for being here in the forest is enhancing and conducting all the traditions and beliefs. It is a tradition that if you are not well versed with the customs and traditions, you cannot lead anyone in the society or qualify to be a leader. That was a statement by one of the Duruma Kaya elders. So again, about the Kayas, no lies are entertained in the sacred forest. And if one happens to be leading in the wrong direction, then following such kind of a person would be like leading to your own death. When the Kaya leaders are appointed, all the necessary traditions and rituals are conducted, and they take an oath of office to protect the ancestral land as well as the holy places. Then the elders also perform all the required sacrifices that need to be done for the swearing in of the new leader. So in our engagement with the sages, we did realize that in terms of enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms, the Mijikenda actually are free to enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms. However, there is a feeling that some modern religions like Christianity and Islam brought something that is different from the fundamental freedoms of the Mijikenda, and this violates their traditions. One of the Kaya elders says, even in our traditions, we are not restricted from performing our rituals, since they are the ones we believe saves us. I would say what is interfering with our traditions are the Christian Wadurumas, that is the Christian Durumas. That is the only place we have a conflict with them. And then the Muslims are the other ones who have a conflict with our traditions. They don't believe you can wear our outfit and go to the mosque for prayers. So they refer to you as a wrongdoer or an evil person. Yeah. So they're just trying to show that in as much as their enjoyment of human rights are respected, they have some clashes with the modern religions like Christianity and Islam. So the Mijikenda stay in the forest and take care of them, especially the Kaya forest, out of their own volition, right? One person says, one of the elders, the Digo Kaya elder, I would also like to thank the government because they recognize the norms and traditions of us as indigenous Digos. and have given us authority to take care of the Kaya forests. That's also a manifestation of enjoyment of human rights as well as fundamental freedoms and recognition by the government. And in terms of the right to self-determination, the government recognizes the Duruma and the Digo indigenous communities. In our study, we were able to engage with only 2 of these sub-tribes, that is the Duruma and the Digo indigenous communities, although I did mention that we have 9 sub-tribes. This was a pilot study, and we seek to scale this up to the 9 sub-tribes so that we can get to know more about their way of life, right? So the government recognizes them and even appoints local authority leadership from among them. You find that the local administration acknowledges and respects the traditions of the community, and they also work with them in terms of local governance structures. Then we also have international organizations like the UNDP, which have also recognized the indigenous community and have come to offer modern farming methods and forest conservation methods to the community. One of the elders says, the UNDP taught us how we could improve our maize farming by offering training while accompanied by agriculturalists. We were taken for a training workshop in Ukunda town, where we were taught how to do diversified agriculture, for example, farming green grams, sorghum, cassava, and other drought-resistant crops. They also taught us about brick making. The main reason for this was to prevent people from cutting down trees, as the Kayas are tradition, a religious site that needs to be protected. And also, the Kaya elders are respected by the political aspirants, and anytime during the election time, they usually come for prayers, asking for strength and power to continue with their politics, right? And then the Mijikenda also carry out their traditional activities without interference from the government, right? They have the right to political status, including the right to choose their leaders and also to be elected for political leadership. As much as they're elected in political leadership, they are also elected into the different religious or social leadership positions in the community. So in terms of their system of beliefs and customary law, Kaya in itself is a tradition, and they don't discriminate against anyone based on their religion. One of the Kaya elders says, the Digo Kaya elder, despite being a Muslim, I cannot walk out of here and go to the mosque with my attire. I will be scaring off people. But the point is, whether Muslim, Christian, or any other, we pray to the same God. As a member of the Kaya, you don't follow any other thing. The community safeguards this Kaya belief because they depend on it during drought. So another social activities that the Mijikenda practice both their traditional religion as well as the modern religions like Christianity and Islam. So the women will be involved when there are traditional prayers, they prepare the place, and also there are some activities that are not allowed to take place in the holy places within the Kayas. In times of drought or a crisis, the Mijikenda community would go to the Kayas to talk to their ancestors to help them solve drought and famine. And one funny thing happened to us on that day that we had gone to talk to one of the sages in the forest. It started raining and it was approaching darkness, and we were 2 kilometers into the forest. And this man just started praying and asking the ancestors to stop the rain. And all of a sudden the rain stopped. I think we captured this in one of the video clips you'll be able to see, we'll share with you the YouTube link for EvalIndigenous, where you can clearly see what happened. Then the Kaya elders also offer sacrifice to the gods by slaughtering, say, a lamb, a cow, or any other things as required by the traditions. In terms of economic activities, they plant tree seedlings, and when these mature, they sell them and get money. They are also engaged in nature conservation because they are organizations that are charged with the mandate of conserving the environment, especially the forest and the wildlife. Yeah, so they engage these indigenous communities. Then the Mijikenda women are involved in businesses such as selling fish and other items. Then they also make handicrafts, which they sell to the tourists who come to visit the Kayas. They also cook and sell traditional food to tourists and perform their traditional dances to earn a living. Lastly, the women also rear animals such as cows, goats, and chicken. But not only women, even men do that. In terms of customary law, the Mijikenda have their own customary laws and systems that guide them, right? If they have a dispute in the community, they start solving this from the family level before going to the elders who sit with the parents and the complainant to try to solve this. They use the traditional court system to solve disputes in the community. And the customary law is organized in such a way that it is the elders that lead it. For example, if one was to be accused of murder, you would not be taken to court first. If you weren't killed intentionally, if it is determined that you killed intentionally, then you would be fined. And for example, one person from your community would be taken, or from your family, as kafara. Kafara is like some sort of a sacrifice, and taken to the other family from which you killed to replace the person that you killed. Such was the way of the customary law of the Mijikenda. So you can see the picture top left is myself in the middle with the research assistant and the young tour guide. The sages have decided to introduce the youth into the ways of life of the community. So this young man in a red t-shirt was guiding us into the holy grounds. And as you can see, we are wearing that black attire, is what is referred to as the attire that cleans you from evil, or guards you from evil forces when you're entering the holy place. And then on top left, top right, we had met some of the tourists who had also come to visit the Kaya, and they decided to take a picture with us up there. And then down there, down right is Mzee Shaban Degwa praying for the rain to stop. As you can see, he's inside his hut and praying for the rain to stop. And shortly after the prayer, the rain stopped and we left the forest. So what are some of the challenges facing the indigenous communities living in the Kayas? One, there's this element of false Kayas. So they're thinking that there are a number of conmen who are out there calling themselves Kayas just to get funding out of this. The initial Kayas are supposed to be 9 from the sub-tribe that we talked about, but now you can find that there are more than 4,000 Kayas, most of them false Kayas, just for business. Then there's the shortage of water. The tree seedlings that we talked about, the women planting trees in the seedlings, they have a challenge of water since they don't have any connected water projects around. Then there's the element of grabbing of the Kayas. These are usually grabbed by some influential persons who sell their land, including parts of the Kaya. So once they sell the land, people come to destroy these Kayas. They need to be protected by forest guards, just like other forests are protected. Then the clash of the religions. We talked about the clash with non-Muslim traditions, religious traditions, as well as with the Christians. Then lastly, Another challenge for the community, the indigenous community, is the market for their produce. That is, they produce, for example, traditional baskets, and these take so long before they can get a buyer, and they have to depend on this to earn their daily bread. How to address these challenges? One, there's need for authentication of genuine kayas. There's need for research to be conducted to establish the genuine kayas and the fake ones. The genuine ones can then be gazetted and given certificates of authentication. In this way, they'll try to get rid of the false kayas. Then the government also needs to work with the local communities. For example, the National Museum of Kenya, to find ways in which they can work in harmony with the indigenous communities. Then the element of public-private partnerships between the local communities, the Kaya elders, and other international and national organizations working on forest conservation is also important. Then the community mentioned that they need to have tapped water and storage tanks, which can help save the challenge of women having to walk long distances to get water for the tree seedlings, as well as water for their domestic use. So there's need to establish the boundaries of the kayas, establish a market for the produce of the women who work in the kayas and link them to the external markets and tourist markets. Then also empowering the youth on environmental conservation, as I mentioned about that young man who was acting as our tour guide inside the kaya, and also involvement of women in the kaya affairs. Generally in the kaya, there are like two departments in most of the kayas. On the one hand is the Department of Tourism, and then the other hand is the Department of Traditions, or the religious aspect of the kayas. So for the tourism, the women entertain the tourists as well as perform traditional dances and prepare food for the tourists and the like. And the sages in the kayas offer prayers for the protection of the community. Right. So that's one of the kayas, Kaya Gandini, which is a national monument and world heritage. As you can see, it's a recognized site by UNESCO. The spelling there is wrong. They've written UNESCO, but it's supposed to be UNESCO. Then there's also the Kaya Kinondo Sacred Forest on the down right. You can see the signboard there by the government, Kaya Kinondo Sacred Forest. So it needs to be protected. So how would we relate the indigenous community and evaluative thinking? So based on some scholars who've talked about evaluative thinking, this is usually motivated by an attitude of inquisitiveness and a belief in the value of evidence. So you find that it talks about being result-oriented, reflective, questioning, and using evidence to test assumptions. And most importantly, it's good to note the relationship between evaluative thinking and critical thinking, in which case we say that evaluative thinking is actually critical thinking plus proactive behavior such as posing questions, seeking evidence, and deciding to act or not to act based on evidence. And how is this manifestation of evaluative thinking among the Mijikenda? We find that they pose thoughtful questions about their context and also about the relationship they have with their past, so as to be able to inform their present and also a possibility to reflect on their future. They're also questioning and using evidence to test on some of the assumptions, especially the social, socioeconomic context, as well as the religious beliefs. They're always reflecting and learning and also modifying their actions based on the evidence about what their traditions are all about and what justified those traditions. So they're seeking evidence in deciding whether to act or not to act. Lastly, in conclusion, this study does conclude that indeed the Mijikenda who live in Kwale County in the southern coast of Kenya are recognized as an indigenous community by the government of Kenya. The Kayas in which they live are recognized as a national heritage and are protected by national laws, and they are even recognized by UNESCO as such. Then the Mijikenda also have a right to self-determination as an indigenous people, as provided for in Article 3 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Persons. The study also confirms the recognition of and the critical role played by women in the management of Kaya affairs. We mentioned about the two departments, the one for tourism and the other for traditions. Then the Mijikenda have an indigenous legal system which is recognized even by the government. This is because the first port of call for addressing any complaints in the community was in the indigenous religious leaders before this could be taken to the government of the land. That is the traditional leaders first before the national government. Then the Mijikenda have maintained their judicial system of customs. This is well in line with the international human rights standards. So I think that's all I had for you. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ponge. That was really great. And sorry, we're keeping our videos up just to help with internet connectivity prevention, hopefully, for any issues. But does anybody have any questions or comments for Dr. Ponge? I do have a question. You mentioned that there's research needed to determine the true Kayas from the fake ones. What would that research look like?
Right. Thank you so much for that question. I did mention that as a result of the migration and at the point where they reached that river and the girl fell down and the pot which was carrying the charm to protect the community from evil spirits, when the pot broke down, they felt that they could not now, the old man could not continue with the journey. So he had to give the broken pieces as a blessing now to each of the different young people to continue with the journey. So it is these different 9 people who led to the formation of the 9 sub-tribes. And for each and every place where they went, they started a Kaya or a holy forest. So it is like the Kaya Digo, Kaya Duruma, all that. So each of these 9 were the initial original Kayas. But interestingly, after this, there are some who, as a result of maybe they want to do business because of the way the traditional leaders are respected, someone just decides and declares that I'm also creating a separate Kaya. So these are the Kayas that we have talked about. There are so many. We are the community was estimating more than 4,000 in the 9 different Kaya regions, but the main ones, the recognized ones, are only 9. So this kind of research needs to find out which are these other Kayas that are in existence. What is it that informs their existence, and why did they break away from these initial 9 Kayas? And then what can the community, what can the local community do insofar as they can try to return all these other breakaway kayas to the mainstream kayas. I think that's the kind of research that would need to be conducted. And then I did also mention that this was a pilot study in which we were able to engage with only 2 of the sub-tribes. That is the Duruma, Kaya Duruma, and the Kaya Digo. So these ones are in South Coast in Kwale County, present Kwale County. The remaining 7 Kayas are in Kilifi County, which is towards the north. So we had anticipated that when we roll this study now further, we would take it to Kilifi County to engage with the 7 remaining sub-tribes so that it could help us understand the reasons for these breakaways and what can be done to return these kayas to their initial status. Thank you.
Thank you for expanding on that. Any other questions?
And also, I was thinking that as you people think about other questions, maybe someone could try to relate some of the challenges that this indigenous community faces, especially the ones living in the forest, in the indigenous forests. If you have similar experiences among your indigenous communities, so that maybe we could have that as a point of comparison. Thank you.
Sure. Does anybody want to jump in to make any connections to their communities as well as to the challenges that are being faced in Kenyan communities?
I'm happy to note the presence of Keiko. Keiko is also one of our active members in EvalIndigenous. Maybe Keiko could tell us something about the indigenous community, either in Canada or in Japan. Thank you, Keiko.
I was afraid you're going to call me. I do have a question though. Like I'm originally from Japan. I live in Canada now. I've been in Canada for many years. But one of the questions I have is that you know, in North America, when we say First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples and indigenous peoples, we think about the people who were here, who's been here for a millennium, and before the settlers came and colonized the whole place, right? But and in Japan, we do have so-called indigenous peoples, but also most of the Japanese are indigenous to Japan. I mean, they may be from different tribes, right? But they're really the same, you know, the race that lived in the nations that lived in that land. Now, when you, in that context, right? So how do people feel about or perceive indigenousness when your ancestors have always lived on that land? So I know that through the process of, you know, might over all other nice things, like what Putin does, is you know, you take somebody else's land by force, and then it might, and in that situation, it may have been from outside the continent, but some are internal to the places that people live. So I'm just really interested in how that is perceived, and yeah, that's my question. Awuor. Ponge, do you think you can answer?
Okay, thank you so much, Keiko, for that.
Oh, and I should add why I'm asking this question, because I think the whole world of evaluation is really still, you know, Western centric. and a lot of concepts of, this, so yeah, everything has to be this way and that way is really not from many of the places that we come from. I am from the island. I'm from Japan. So my conceptual thinking is not all this, it's all have to be clear and we're going to fight over who's stronger than whatnot. Like, we can live in a gray zone. It's perfectly fine to coexist happily. So I'm just wondering from that perspective. Yeah. Okay, Ponge, go.
Oh, thank you so much, Keiko, for that question and for explaining why you're asking the question. Now, I think in the Kenyan context and in the African context, we find that the Africans have engaged with the Western world and say the Eastern world, also the outside world, that is, and there has been adulteration of some of the way in which they think and act. So in terms of indigeneity, we are thinking about the respect for the traditions. How have we been true to the traditions of our past? What our ancestors used to, how they used to conduct their lives, right? Then if we show respect for that, then it means that we are returning to our indigeneity. Then there's also the respect for land. And for this particular case, we are saying that the indigenous land of these people is within the sacred forest, the kayas, as well as within the surrounding part. And this traditional or indigenous land is protected and also recognized by the government. So the recognition of their land in itself shows the recognition of them as indigenous people. Then in terms of language, we also find that there has been a lot of mixing between the indigenous language as well as the modern languages because of this, the modern way of life. But we find that this kind of people, these indigenous communities, they still have respect for their language, right? In as much as they would learn other languages for purposes of communication, they still respect for this and they pass this from the old generation by word of mouth to the new generation. And they tell them that it is good, yes, to embrace modernity, but do not shun your past or your language. And then also in terms of religious practices, you did hear me mention about these Kaya elders when they're wearing their traditional attire for the religion. And then they say, they could be, for example, one was a Muslim and he was saying, I'm a Muslim, yes, but I'm also a Kaya elder first. So Kaya elder, I have to wear this when I'm offering the prayers, right? But he says that he cannot wear the same. If he goes with that same attire to the mosque, then he will scare off people. People will think that, oh, this is an evil person who has come to the mosque. You see, so those are some of the clashes that are coming as a result of these modern religions like Christianity and Islam. But they emphasize that first and foremost, respect your traditional religions and practices. So those are some of the manifestations of the indigenous essence in these local communities. I don't know whether I answered your question, Keiko.
Thank you, Ponge. Yeah, it is I think it's a different, it's a bit of a different conversation when it naturally kind of mixed around over time. Sorry, there's a truck going by at my house. But it is an interesting conversation to have. And one of the things is that I think we should bring our own selves to an evaluation fully. And I think that's the other part that's really important to me that I'm involved in EvalIndigenous. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Keiko.
Absolutely, I agree. Really appreciate your perspective on the question that Keiko posed. I think it's something that a lot of Indigenous communities are going to continue wrestling with for a while, and trying to figure out. And I think it contributes to the challenges you talked about with what exactly the barriers are for Kenya adopting, official legislation around Indigenous communities and adopting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as well. So really appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. We will have this recording sent out to you, and we will also have it available for our IPTIG members. And please don't forget, next Tuesday, October 11th at 12 p.m. Central Time is our next paper bag series. Ponge, did you have anything else you wanted to share?
No, I just want to thank everyone for listening and for your great participation. I truly appreciate, and also to the American Evaluation Association. Thank you so much for organizing this, and it was a really good opportunity to share with you what we do as EvalIndigenous. I can see here we have at least Aneta is there and Keiko. At least these are the ones that I can put my finger on as some of the most active members of EvalIndigenous, and we would be happy to continue sharing with your thematic interest group what we do at EvalIndigenous. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Great. Have a wonderful day, everyone.